I never imagined my marriage would end because of a weather app. But looking back, that's exactly where it started, with my wife Julia's sudden, inexplicable obsession with meteorology. It was a Sunday morning in September when I first noticed something was off. I came downstairs to find Julia hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, studying weather forecasts with the kind of intensity I usually reserve for quarterly shipping reports at work. "Planning something?" I asked, pouring myself coffee from the pot she'd already made. She looked up with that smile, the one I'd later realize was rehearsed, practiced in mirrors, and perfected over 3 years of deception. "Just daydreaming about vacation spots. You know how Portland gets in winter. Reasonable enough, except she was checking Boston's forecast. Boston in September isn't exactly a tropical getaway, and the way she studied those weather patterns, wind speeds, barometric pressure, visibility ratings, seemed more operational than recreational. I should know. As a logistics manager for Pacific Northwest Shipping, I understood how weather affected operations. This looked exactly like operational planning. "Boston?" I asked, glancing over her shoulder. She closed the laptop quickly. Too quickly. "Oh, just comparing different cities. You know me, always overthinking everything." I did know her. Or I thought I did. We'd been married 12 years, together for 15. Julia worked as a regional sales director for MedTech Solutions, managing medical equipment accounts across the western states. She'd climbed that ladder through determination and charisma, traits I'd fallen in love with when we'd met at a mutual friend's barbecue all those years ago. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't help noticing her weather fixation intensifying. Every morning, she'd check forecasts for seemingly random cities: Denver, Chicago, Atlanta, Seattle. Cities where MedTech had no offices, no major clients. She kept a small planner in her purse, and I'd catch glimpses of cryptic notations: DTW 14th clear, or ORD 20-second delay likely. "What's DTW?" I asked one evening as she scribbled in the planner. "Detroit," she said without looking up. "Potential new client territory." "I thought MedTech's territory ended at the Rockies?" She paused, pen hovering over the page. "They're considering expansion." "I'm doing preliminary research. The thing about being married to someone for 12 years is you develop a sense for their tells." Julia's tell when lying was always the same. She'd provide too much detail, then change the subject quickly. The expansion would be gradual, starting with major medical centers in key markets. Speaking of markets, did you see the Blazers traded their point guard? I hadn't and didn't care about basketball, which she knew. But I let it go. Maybe I was overthinking things. Julia's job had gotten more demanding over the past 3 years as she'd moved up to regional director. More travel, more responsibilities, more stress. If checking weather helped her feel prepared, who was I to judge? But the pattern kept nagging at me. She'd announce a conference in Phoenix while obsessively checking Minneapolis weather. She'd claim client meetings in Los Angeles while monitoring storm systems over Denver. My logical mind, the same one that coordinated complex shipping routes and managed supply chain disruptions, couldn't reconcile these discontinuities. One evening in October, Julia was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A weather alert. But not for Portland, where we lived. Not for San Francisco, where she claimed to be traveling next week. The alert was for Houston. Severe thunderstorms expected, possible flight delays at George Bush International. I shouldn't have looked further, but I did. Her weather app had alerts set for multiple cities, none of them places she'd mentioned visiting. Houston, Boston, Seattle, Miami, all major airline hubs. The analytical part of my brain was already forming hypotheses, but I pushed them away. There had to be a reasonable explanation. "Hey, Jules," I called through the bathroom door. "You've got weather alerts going off. Houston's got storms coming." The water shut off immediately. Houston. That's weird. Must be from when I was researching that potential client last month. I'll fix it. But she hadn't mentioned any Houston clients. And when she emerged from the bathroom, there was something in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but calculation. Like she was solving a complex equation where I'd become an unexpected variable. The next morning, I decided to pay closer attention. Julia left for the office at her usual time, but I called in sick, something I rarely did. I spent the day doing something I'm not proud of, but couldn't stop myself from doing. I investigated my wife. I started with our shared laptop, the one we kept in the home office. Her browser history was mostly cleared, but she'd forgotten about the weather bookmark folder. Dozens of links to aviation weather sites, flight tracking services, airline crew scheduling forums. One bookmark was labeled simply J Schedule. When I clicked it, it required a password. Our credit card statement showed the expected pattern of Julia's business travel, all properly reimbursed by MedTech. But there were small charges she'd paid personally. $50 here, $75 there, to airlines for something called Z fees. I looked it up. Z fares were discounted tickets airline employees could purchase for personal travel. But Julia didn't work for an airline. I went deeper into her email, using the account recovery option on our shared computer. Most of her correspondence was routine: work emails, shopping confirmations, newsletters. But there was a folder labeled Conferences that contained registration confirmations for events she'd attended. I cross-referenced them with her actual travel dates. Half of them didn't match. The conference in Phoenix she'd attended last month? The actual event had been in Dallas. The client meetings in Los Angeles? The emails showed she'd been in Seattle. My wife had been systematically lying about her destinations for who knows how long. I sat back in our home office chair, staring at the evidence on the screen. The weather obsession suddenly made perfect sense, but not in any way I wanted to acknowledge. She wasn't tracking weather for cities she planned to visit for work. She was tracking weather for someone else. Someone whose schedule depended on weather conditions. Someone who flew planes. The realization hit me like turbulence on a smooth flight. The airline terminology, the weather patterns, the hub cities, the mysterious ZED fees. Julia was having an affair with a pilot. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkening office as the Portland autumn rain began its evening percussion against the windows. 12 years of marriage, and I'd been reduced to a logistics problem, something to route around, to manage, to deceive. But I was good at logistics, very good. And if Julia thought she could navigate this affair without me noticing the flight path, she'd severely underestimated the man she'd married. That night at dinner, I watched her check her phone repeatedly, frowning at something on the screen. "Everything okay?" I asked, cutting into the salmon she'd prepared. "Oh, just weather delays in Denver. It might affect my San Diego trip next week." "I didn't know you flew through Denver to get to San Diego." She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "Sometimes the connections are better that way. Saves time." "Interesting. I always thought the direct flights were faster." "Not always," she said, returning to her phone. "The airline industry is complicated." "I'm sure it is," I replied, taking a sip of wine. especially when you're trying to coordinate schedules. She looked up sharply, studying my face. I kept my expression neutral, the same look I used during difficult negotiations with shipping partners. After a moment, she relaxed. The scheduling is definitely the worst part. You never know when something might get canceled or delayed. Must be frustrating, I said. All that planning, only to have weather ruin everything. Exactly, she said, relief evident in her voice. That's exactly it. We finished dinner in relative silence, both lost in our own thoughts. Julia thinking about weather in Denver and someone who flew through there. Me thinking about how to uncover the truth without destroying everything in the process. Later that night, as Julia slept beside me, I lay awake planning my next moves. I needed more information before confronting her. I needed to know who, how long, how often. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. I thought about hiring a private investigator immediately, but decided to do more research on my own first. My shipping industry connections included people at airlines, cargo coordinators, logistics specialists. Maybe I could leverage those relationships to understand Julia's travel patterns better. The next day, I reached out to Marcus Reed, a former airline security manager who'd transitioned to private investigation. We'd met at an industry conference years ago, stayed in touch through LinkedIn. I presented it as a hypothetical at first. Marcus, weird question for you. If someone was traveling frequently but lying about destinations, what would be the best way to track their actual movements? That's not a hypothetical, is it, Carl? I sighed. No, it's not. Email me what you have. Flight dates, claim destinations, any documentation. I'll see what I can find. Within 3 days, Marcus had preliminary answers that confirmed my worst fears while revealing a complexity I hadn't imagined. Your wife is definitely traveling to different cities than she claims, he told me, over coffee at a discreet cafe downtown. But Carl, this isn't amateur hour. She's built an entire system around this deception. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were flight manifests, hotel records, credit card transactions I hadn't seen. Julia had been flying on United Airlines consistently, always to cities where a Captain James Fitzgerald had layovers. James Fitzgerald, Marcus explained, flies primarily transcontinental routes. Houston to Boston Mondays, Boston to Seattle Wednesdays, Seattle to Miami Fridays. Your wife's travel pattern matches his layover schedule with 89% correlation. I stared at the data, my logistics brain automatically calculating the complexity of maintaining such a schedule. How long? Based on the patterns, at least 3 years. Possibly longer, but that's when the consistent pattern emerged. 3 years. 3 years of conferences that weren't conferences, client meetings that weren't meetings, business trips that were nothing but carefully orchestrated affairs. There's more, Marcus said, pulling out another document. The financial aspect. She's been very clever about it. The document showed a web of expense reports, company reimbursements, and transactions. Julia had created fake vendor accounts within MedTech System, Conference Logistics LLC, Medical Training Solutions, Healthcare Events International. All shells that invoiced MedTech for services never rendered. She's embezzling? I asked, stunned. Technically, yes, though she's been careful to keep individual amounts small enough to avoid automatic audits. We're talking about $200,000 over 3 years, but spread across dozens of transactions. I felt sick. This wasn't just an affair. This was systematic fraud, A criminal enterprise built around adultery. What about this James Fitzgerald? Marcus pulled up a photo on his phone. James was everything I wasn't. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confident smile that came from commanding aircraft at 30,000 feet. He was 58, married with 2 adult children, based in Houston but rarely home. Currently going through a divorce, Marcus added. His wife Patricia filed 6 months ago. Irreconcilable differences, but I'm betting she doesn't know about Julia. I studied the photo, trying to understand what Julia saw in him beyond the obvious physical contrast to my own average build and receding hairline. Then it hit me. It wasn't just about him. It was about the lifestyle, the excitement, the altitude. I managed shipping routes from behind a desk. James soared above clouds. I dealt with traffic and deadlines. He dealt with thrust and lift. "What do you want to do with this information?" Marcus asked. "I need more," I said. "I need everything. Financial records, communication patterns, their plans. If I'm going to confront this, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Marcus nodded. "I'll keep digging." "But Carl, you need to protect yourself legally. Document everything, secure your assets, consult an attorney." That afternoon, I met with Robert Nash, a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases involving professional misconduct. His office overlooked the Willamette River, all leather and dark wood, designed to convey stability during life's most unstable moments. "Infidelity is one thing," Robert said after reviewing Marcus's preliminary findings. "But embezzlement, fraud, misuse of company resources, that changes everything. Oregon is a no-fault divorce state, but judicial discretion applies when one party has engaged in criminal activity affecting marital assets." What does that mean practically? It means if we can prove she's been stealing from her company to fund this affair, she loses significant leverage. She could face criminal charges, civil lawsuits, loss of professional licenses. Most importantly for you, it could affect property division and eliminate any alimony claims. I thought about Julia, about the woman I'd married, the one who used to leave me funny notes in my lunch bag, who'd held my hand through my father's cancer treatment, who'd celebrated with champagne when I got promoted to regional logistics manager. How had we gotten here? "I need more evidence first," I said. "I need to understand the full scope." Robert nodded. "Take your time, but not too much. Every day you wait is another day she could be hiding assets or destroying evidence. And Carl, start documenting everything. Every conversation, every suspicious activity, every financial transaction. Build your case like you'd build a logistics plan, thoroughly and with redundancy." Over the next month, I became a detective in my own marriage. I tracked Julia's claimed destinations versus her actual flights. I photographed her planner when she wasn't looking, documenting those cryptic weather notations. I installed a hidden GPS tracker in her car, legally questionable but emotionally necessary. The pattern was undeniable. When Julia claimed to be at a medical equipment conference in Phoenix, she was actually in Seattle, where flight records showed Captain Fitzgerald had a 34-hour layover. When she said she was meeting clients in San Diego, she was in Boston, checked into the airport Marriott where James was staying. I started taking screenshots of her weather app whenever she left her phone unattended. The cities she monitored matched James's flight routes perfectly. She'd even set up alerts for specific airports, not Portland, where we lived, but the cities where they met. The most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Julia had gotten sloppy with her digital security, using the same password across multiple accounts. Once I had access to one, I could access others. Her personal email contained a second account I didn't know about, one she used exclusively for communication with James. The emails went back 3 years, starting with flirtatious messages after meeting at a Denver hotel bar, escalating to explicit planning of their encounters. But it was the recent emails that revealed their endgame. "My divorce will be final in 6 months," James had written. "Then 2 more years until mandatory retirement. We can make this work, Jules. 2 years of careful planning, then we disappear. My pension plus your savings, we can live anywhere." Julia's response: "Carl suspects nothing. He's too focused on his shipping schedules to notice mine. 2 more years of this, then freedom. I've started transitioning my major accounts to Bradley. By the time I leave MedTech, no one will question it." She was planning to leave me. Not just having an affair, but actively planning our marriage's end, timing it to coincide with James's retirement. The weather tracking, the travel deception, the embezzlement, all part of a 2-year exit strategy. I sat in my home office reading these emails while Julia was at her legitimate job and felt something shift inside me. The hurt transformed into something colder, more calculated. If she wanted to play logistics games, she'd chosen the wrong opponent. I created my own tracking system, a spreadsheet that would make any logistics manager proud. Every flight, every hotel, every expense report, cross-referenced and verified. I documented patterns that Julia herself probably hadn't noticed. How she always ordered room service on the first night with James. How she'd charge exactly $150 to client entertainment to establish a pattern. How she'd create fake conference attendance by actually registering but never attending. Marcus continued his investigation, uncovering more disturbing details. Julia had been drugging me. Nothing dangerous but strategic. Before her trips, she'd make heavy meals with red meat, encourage wine consumption, sometimes even crush a Benadryl into my evening tea. She needed me deeply asleep for her early morning departures and late-night returns. "She's been playing you like an airline schedule," Marcus told me during one of our meetings. "Every move calculated for maximum efficiency and minimum detection." The evidence mounted. Hotel security footage Marcus obtained through industry contacts showed Julia and James entering rooms together. Credit card records revealed purchases of lingerie before trips, expensive dinners in cities where MedTech had no business interests. She'd even joined airline employee discount programs using James's credentials, saving money on personal purchases while leaving a digital trail. One evening in November, Julia announced another trip. "Conference in Las Vegas next week," she said, not looking up from her laptop. "The big medical equipment expo. 3 days, maybe 4 if the networking events run long." I checked online. There actually was a medical equipment expo in Las Vegas. But I also checked James's typical schedule. He'd have a 30-hour layover in Vegas on those exact dates. "Sounds important," I said. "Maybe I should come with you. I have some vacation days to use, and Vegas could be fun." She looked up sharply, calculating. "It'll be boring for you. All medical equipment demonstrations and sales presentations. Plus, I'll be in meetings all day. I could entertain myself, play some poker, see some shows." "Carl, really, it's not a good idea. These conferences are where I build client relationships. Having my husband there would be unprofessional." The excuse was weak, but I didn't push. I had other plans for Las Vegas. I contacted Patricia Fitzgerald, James's soon-to-be ex-wife. Marcus had found her contact information, and I reached out carefully, presenting myself as someone with information relevant to her divorce. "Your husband is having an affair with my wife," I told her over the phone. "I have evidence that might be useful for your proceedings." Patricia's laugh was bitter. "I suspected as much. He was never home, always had excuses, but I could never prove it." "I can prove it. Hotel records, flight manifests, emails, 3 years of documented encounters." "3 years?" Her voice cracked. "That's when he started becoming distant." "Said it was job stress, midlife anxiety. I went to therapy thinking it was my fault. We agreed to share information and coordinate our responses." Patricia's attorney was particularly interested in the abuse of airline employee benefits, using buddy passes for Julia, getting her employee discounts, potentially violating United's code of conduct. Meanwhile, I consulted with Patricia Wong, a forensic accountant who specialized in corporate fraud. She reviewed the evidence of Julia's embezzlement scheme and built a comprehensive case showing exactly how the fraud worked. "This is sophisticated but traceable," Patricia told me. "Every fake vendor, every fraudulent expense, every misused company resource, MedTech will definitely prosecute if they see this." I also started my own psychological warfare. Nothing dramatic, just subtle disruptions to Julia's carefully orchestrated system. I'd casually mention weather in cities where James was flying. "Looks like Denver's getting snow. Hope that doesn't affect any flights." Julia would immediately check her phone, anxiety flickering across her face. I booked myself on Julia's flights without telling her, using different airlines but arriving at the same airports. Twice she saw me at baggage claim, both times explaining it away as coincidence. Small world, I'd say. Here for supplier meetings. The stress was affecting her. She became more paranoid, constantly checking if I was tracking her phone, clearing her browser history obsessively, even buying a second laptop she thought I didn't know about. But I knew. I knew about the laptop hidden in her car trunk, the secret credit card, the backup phone she used only for James. 2 weeks before Vegas, I finalized my plan. Robert Nash, my attorney, had everything ready: divorce papers, asset protection strategies, documentation of Julia's fraud. Patricia Fitzgerald's attorney was prepared to ambush James with amended divorce filings, including adultery charges. Patricia Wong had prepared a package for MedTech's internal audit department. But I wanted Julia to arrive in Vegas thinking everything was perfect. I played the oblivious husband flawlessly. I wished her luck at the conference, helped her pack, even drove her to the airport. "Have a great conference," I said, kissing her goodbye at departures. "Knock 'em dead." She smiled, that same practiced smile from months ago. "Thanks, honey. I'll call you when I land." She didn't know I'd be on the next flight. Vegas unfolded like a carefully orchestrated logistics operation. Julia checked into the Palazzo, attended the conference during the day, maintaining her cover perfectly. I watched from a distance, documenting everything. James arrived that evening, but his layover didn't go as planned. At the airport, he was met by a process server with Patricia's amended divorce filing. The documents included evidence of adultery, misuse of airline benefits, and potential ethics violations that could trigger a United Airlines internal investigation. I watched from a coffee shop as James read the papers, his phone immediately lighting up with calls he didn't answer. Julia, probably, wondering why he hadn't arrived at the hotel. At the conference, MedTech's CFO, who'd flown in that morning after receiving Patricia Wong's fraud documentation, pulled Julia into an emergency meeting. I couldn't see inside the conference room, But I saw Julia emerge an hour later, pale and shaken, security escorting her to collect her belongings. That evening, Julia returned to her hotel room to find me sitting in the lobby with Robert Nash. "Hello, Julia," I said calmly. "We need to talk." The color drained from her face. "Carl? What are you doing here?" "Same thing you are, apparently. Though my meeting is actually legitimate." Robert stepped forward, handing her an envelope. "Mrs. Brennan, these are divorce papers. We need to discuss the terms of your separation." Julia looked between us, calculating, always calculating. "This is ambush. I want my lawyer." "By all means," Robert said. "But you should know that MedTech has already terminated your employment and is pursuing civil recovery of misappropriated funds. Captain Fitzgerald has been served with his own papers. And the Palazzo Security has been notified that you're no longer a guest in good standing due to the fraudulent credit card used for booking." It was a lie about the credit card, but Julia didn't know that. She sat heavily in a lobby chair, the weight of 3 years of deception finally crashing down. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "About 4 months," I said. "Since you got sloppy with the weather tracking." She laughed bitterly. "The weather? Of course. I should have been more careful. You should have been honest. Or faithful. Or at minimum, not a criminal." "Criminal? I never—" 200,000 in fraudulent expenses, Julia. Fake vendors, embezzlement, fraud. That's criminal." She stared at me, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Not the boring logistics manager she'd written about in her emails to James, but someone capable of the same calculated planning she'd prided herself on. "What do you want?" she asked. "A quick, clean divorce. You don't contest the asset division Robert has proposed, roughly 30% to you, given the Marshall waste and fraud. You repay MedTech. You leave quietly. And if I don't? Then MedTech presses criminal charges. Patricia Fitzgerald shares the adultery evidence with United Airlines. Your professional reputation is destroyed publicly instead of privately. Your choice." She considered her options, that calculating look I'd grown to recognize. But there weren't any good options left. Every flight path led to the same destination. "James?" she asked. "Dealing with his own problems." Patricia's attorney was very thorough. His flying days might be numbered. Julia closed her eyes, perhaps finally understanding that her carefully constructed altitude had evaporated. 3 years of planning, destroyed by weather patterns and a husband who understood logistics better than she'd assumed. The divorce proceeded with business-like efficiency. Julia's attorney negotiated minor adjustments, but the fraud evidence left little room for maneuvering. The proceedings took 9 months, during which Julia moved to a temporary apartment and began looking for work outside the medical equipment industry. James faced a United Airlines ethics review. While union rules protected his job, he received a formal reprimand, lost his premium route assignments, and was relegated to regional flights. His income dropped by 40%, his reputation tarnished, his divorce from Patricia costing him half his assets and a portion of his pension. The affair couldn't survive the exposure. Ground-level reality proved fatal to a relationship built at altitude. James blamed Julia for the sloppy operational security. Julia blamed James for the easy traceability of his schedule. Their last communication was through lawyers, arguing over who owed whom for canceled trip deposits. MedTech pursued civil recovery but not criminal prosecution. Julia agreed to repay $40,000 over 5 years. a negotiated settlement that avoided the cost and publicity of a trial. Her termination for cause made her unemployable in any position involving expense accounts or financial responsibility. 6 months after Vegas, I received an update from Marcus. Julia had found work as a medical billing clerk at a community clinic in East Portland, earning about a quarter of her previous salary. She'd sold her BMW, moved to a studio apartment, took the bus to work. The weather apps had been deleted from her phone. A year after the divorce, I ran into her at a grocery store. She was buying generic brands, calculating prices on her phone. She saw me and froze, uncertain whether to acknowledge me or pretend we were strangers. "Hello, Julia," I said, neutral as Switzerland. "Carl." She managed a small smile, genuine this time. "You look well." "I am." "You?" She shrugged. "Surviving?" "Learning to live at ground level." It was an interesting choice of words. "No more weather tracking?" "No point," she said. "All flights are grounded now." We stood awkwardly in the cereal aisle. Two people who'd shared 12 years, a house, dreams of growing old together, now reduced to painful small talk between the Cheerios and cornflakes. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "Not for the affair. I mean, I am, but I'm sorry for how I did it. The deception, the stealing, the drugging. That was wrong." "Yes," I agreed. "It was. I got addicted to it," she continued. "Not just James, but the whole system. The planning, the logistics, the secret knowledge. Every successful trip felt like winning. I convinced myself I was clever instead of cruel." "You were both," I said. "Very clever. Very cruel." She nodded, accepting the assessment. "I hear you got promoted. Regional director. News travels." "You deserve it. You were always better at logistics than you gave yourself credit for." "Apparently so." We parted without goodbye, just mutual nods of acknowledgement. I watched her walk to the bus stop, umbrella ready for Portland's perpetual rain. No longer checking weather in distant cities, no longer tracking storms she'd never fly through. The next morning, I deleted my weather tracking spreadsheet, the one documenting Julia's patterns. I didn't need it anymore. The forecast was finally clear. No deception on the horizon, no turbulence in my flight path. But I kept her planner, the one with the cryptic notations. Sometimes I'd flip through it, seeing the evidence of her double life. DTW, 14th clear. Or 20-second delay likely. Each notation a small betrayal, a moment when she'd chosen altitude over honesty. The aviation community turned our story into a cautionary tale. The weather-tracking wife became infamous in pilot forums and airline employee groups. Gate agents who'd unknowingly helped Julia meet James felt betrayed. Hotel staff who'd thought they were facilitating a long-distance romance learned they'd been enabling adultery. James retired early, unable to recover his reputation or premium routes. His retirement income, already halved by divorce, barely covered a modest apartment in Houston. The man who'd commanded Boeing 737s at 30,000 feet was grounded permanently, his wings clipped by his own poor judgment. Patricia Fitzgerald, James's ex-wife, sent me a Christmas card that year. A simple message. "Thank you for the truth." It set me free. She'd started dating again, she wrote. Someone who stayed at ground level, someone who came home every night. Robert Nash, my attorney, told me our case became a teaching example at legal conferences. The importance of documenting financial fraud in divorce proceedings, he'd titled his presentation. He sent me a bottle of good scotch as thanks for the speaking opportunities it provided. Marcus Reed, the investigator, stayed in touch. He'd expanded his practice to specifically include airline-related investigations. You'd be amazed how many affairs involve pilots or flight attendants, he told me. Something about altitude makes people think the rules don't apply. Patricia Wong, the forensic accountant, successfully helped MedTech recover most of the embezzled funds. She implemented new audit procedures that caught two other employees running similar schemes. Your ex-wife was creative, she told me. Her system is now a case study in our training materials. 2 years after Vegas, I was in Denver for a legitimate shipping conference when I saw him. James Fitzgerald, in civilian clothes, sitting at an airport bar. He was drinking alone, watching planes take off through the window. He looked older, grayer, diminished. Our eyes met. He recognized me, started to get up, perhaps to leave or confront me. Instead, he raised his glass slightly, a mock toast to mutual destruction. I nodded back, acknowledging the strange brotherhood of men whose wives had chosen altitude over marriage. I thought about approaching him, comparing notes on deception and discovery. But what would be the point? We were both grounded now, in different ways. Him from flying, me from trusting. Both learning to navigate at lower altitudes. My phone buzzed with a weather alert. Portland expecting rain, which wasn't news. I deleted the weather app entirely. I didn't need to track storms anymore. They'd already passed through, leaving damage but also clarity. The shipping industry kept me busy, my promotion bringing new challenges and opportunities. I traveled occasionally now, legitimately to actual conferences and real client meetings. I'd stay at airport hotels sometimes, seeing flight crews come and go, wondering how many were meeting people they shouldn't be meeting. I started dating eventually, cautiously. A fellow logistics professional named Sarah, who managed supply chains for a coffee company. She was refreshingly direct, no hidden agendas or secret weather tracking. When she traveled, she actually went where she said she was going. I Googled you, she admitted on our third date. Found some interesting forum posts about your ex-wife. The weather tracking wife posts? Those are the ones. Must have been devastating. It was educational, I said. I learned that people can build entire parallel lives, complete with their own logistics systems and operational requirements. I also learned that every system has vulnerabilities. And you found them. Eventually, though I should have noticed sooner, the weather obsession was such an obvious tell in retrospect. Sarah laughed. Well, I promise my only weather interest is whether I need an umbrella. We took things slowly, both of us carrying baggage from previous relationships. But there was something healing about honest conversation, about trips that were actually trips, about weather that was just weather. 3 years after Vegas, Julia sent me a letter through her attorney. A real letter, handwritten, not an email. She'd been in therapy, she wrote, working through what she called her altitude addiction. I confused elevation with escape, she wrote. Every flight with James felt like leaving ordinary life behind. The logistics of deception became their own high. I was addicted to the cleverness of it, the secret knowledge, the parallel life I'd built. I see now that I was running from something, though I'm still not sure what. She'd paid off half her debt to MedTech, was working steadily if unglamorously. She'd started seeing someone, an X-ray technician at her clinic who'd never been on a plane, who thought travel meant driving to the coast for weekends. I hope you found peace, she concluded. I hope you found someone who stays at ground level, who doesn't need weather reports for cities they'll never visit. You deserved better than a wife tracking storms in places she wasn't supposed to be. I didn't respond, but I kept the letter. It felt like closure, an acknowledgement of the damage done and the lessons learned. Julia had finally landed from her 3-year flight, discovering that ground level wasn't the prison she'd imagined, but simply reality. Less exciting than altitude, but more stable, more honest. The weather app stayed deleted from my phone. Portland's climate was predictable enough. Rain most of the year, brief summer respite, more rain. I didn't need to track patterns anymore, didn't need to decode cryptic notations or wonder why someone was obsessed with visibility in cities they weren't visiting. Sometimes I'd see planes overhead, leaving contrails across Portland's gray skies, and think about the complexity inside them. Pilots managing schedules, flight attendants on rotations, passengers traveling to claimed or actual destinations. Each plane a potential vessel for deception, each flight path an opportunity for betrayal. But mostly, I focused on ground-level logistics, shipping routes that were transparent, supply chains that were documented, movements that could be tracked and verified. There was comfort in honest complexity, in systems that were intricate but not deceptive. The story of the weather-tracking wife became part of aviation lore, a cautionary tale told in pilot lounges and flight attendant break rooms. How a logistics manager discovered his wife's affair through weather patterns. How 3 years of deception unraveled because someone noticed storms being tracked in the wrong cities. Marcus told me he'd used our case to train other investigators. The key tell was the weather obsession, he'd explain. People having affairs with pilots always track weather obsessively. They need to know if their lover's flight will be delayed, if their plans need adjusting. It's operational security that becomes operational vulnerability. MedTech implemented new expense audit procedures, requiring double verification for conference attendance, random spot checks on vendor legitimacy. Julia's fraud scheme became a template for what to watch for. Her creativity in deception transformed into corporate prevention strategies. United Airlines updated their employee conduct policies, specifically addressing misuse of travel benefits for extramarital affairs. The Fitzgerald Amendment, employees called it informally. James's legacy wasn't his years of safe flights, but the policy changes his indiscretion triggered. 4 years after Vegas, I was promoted again to Pacific Northwest Shipping's executive team. The investigation skills I'd developed uncovering Julia's deception proved valuable in corporate compliance and risk management. I became the person who spotted patterns others missed, who noticed when logistics didn't align with stated objectives. Sarah and I moved in together, buying a house in Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood. She brought her weather app preferences, just basic forecasts, no obsessive tracking. We planned actual vacations to places we both wanted to visit, booking flights transparently, sharing itineraries openly. One evening, sorting through boxes in the garage, I found Julia's weather planner. I'd kept it all these years, evidence of a marriage's destruction. Sarah found me sitting on a box, flipping through pages of cryptic notations. "The famous weather tracker," she asked. "The very one." Why keep it? I considered the question. Reminder, I suppose, that people can build entire secret worlds, complete with their own weather systems. That marriage can become a logistics problem to solve rather than a life to share. Sarah sat beside me, looking at the notations. These are all airport codes. Everyone. She was tracking her lover's flight schedule, planning their encounters around weather patterns and layovers. That's actually impressive in a horrible way. The complexity of maintaining that for 3 years. She was always good at logistics, I admitted, just applied them to the wrong purpose. We donated the planner to Marcus for his training materials. Let future investigators learn from Julia's methods. Let other spouses discover deception before 3 years passed. The weather in Portland continued its predictable patterns. Rain, clouds, brief sun, more rain. I learned to appreciate the consistency, the lack of surprise. No hidden storms in distant cities, no turbulence in places I wasn't supposed to monitor. James Fitzgerald died of a heart attack 5 years after Vegas. The obituary mentioned his years of service with United Airlines, but not the scandal that ended his career. Patricia, his ex-wife, didn't attend the funeral. Julia did, according to Marcus, who kept tabs on such things. She stood at the back, left before the reception, driving away in her old Honda Civic. How did she look? I asked Marcus. Older, tired, like someone who'd been flying at altitude too long and finally understood the cost of cabin pressure. MedTech eventually recovered all the embezzled funds through Julia's payments and insurance claims. They used the case in corporate training, a cautionary tale about expense fraud and the importance of verification. Julia's name was redacted, but everyone in the industry knew the story of the sales director who funded an affair through fake conferences. The Weather Tracking Wife forum posts eventually archived, replaced by new scandals and discoveries. But the phrase entered the vernacular of private investigators and divorce attorneys. Is this a weather tracking situation? They had asked. Meaning, was someone obsessively monitoring conditions in cities they weren't supposed to care about? 6 years after Vegas, I received a final communication from Julia. Not a letter this time, but a message through LinkedIn. She'd completed her payments to MedTech, she wrote. Debt cleared, record clean, though reputation destroyed. She was leaving Portland, moving to a small town in Idaho where her sister lived, where nobody knew about weather tracking or altitude addiction. I wanted you to know I finally understand what I lost, she wrote. Not just the marriage or the career, but the ground-level life we'd built. I was so focused on reaching altitude that I didn't realize I was already flying, just at a lower, steadier elevation, with you. I didn't respond, but I did check Idaho weather once, out of curiosity. Clear skies, no storms forecast. Good conditions for starting over, for learning to live without checking weather in cities you're not supposed to visit. Sarah noticed me checking weather outside Portland and raised an eyebrow. Idaho, I explained. Julia's moving there. Checking her weather now? Just once. Closure, I suppose. Sarah smiled, understanding. As long as you're not tracking storms in random cities. Never again. I learned that lesson. Weather is just weather unless someone makes it operational intelligence. We married the following spring, a small ceremony with transparent planning and no secret weather tracking. Sarah's family flew in from Minnesota, their flights arriving on schedule. My family drove up from California, no flight risks involved. The weather cooperated. One of Portland's rare sunny spring days, no storms requiring contingency planning. During our vows, Sarah promised to always tell me her actual destination when traveling. I promised to trust her itineraries without verification. The guests laughed, not knowing the weight behind those specific promises. Life settled into honest patterns. Work, home, occasional travel that was exactly what it claimed to be. I'd sometimes see planes overhead and wonder about the passengers, but without the obsessive need to track or verify. Weather became just weather again, something to consider for umbrella requirements, not operational planning. Years passed. The weather tracking wife story faded from active circulation, becoming historical rather than current. New technologies made deception both easier and harder, location sharing, but also GPS spoofing. The methods evolved, but the patterns remained. Someone, somewhere, was always tracking weather in cities they weren't supposed to care about. Marcus retired, writing a book about aviation-related investigations. Chapter 3 was titled, The Weather Trackin' Wife, How Meteorology Exposed Adultery. He sent me an advance copy, names changed but patterns preserved. It read like fiction but was painfully real. Patricia Wong, the forensic accountant, became MedTech's chief compliance officer, her promotion partly due to the systems she'd implemented after Julia's fraud. She sent me occasional updates, proud of catching schemes before they could mature into 3-year operations. Robert Nash, my divorce attorney, became a judge, his experience with complex financial divorces making him ideal for family court. He'd sometimes reference weather tracking in his decisions, code for obsessive monitorings that revealed deception. 10 years after Vegas, I was CEO of Pacific Northwest Shipping, my logistics expertise refined by personal experience with deception. I'd learned to spot patterns others missed, to question itineraries that didn't align, to notice when someone was tracking storms in the wrong cities. Sarah and I had 2 children by then, daughters who'd grow up with transparent parents, no secret weather apps or hidden flight schedules. We'd tell them eventually about their father's first marriage, the woman who confused altitude with escape, who built a parallel life complete with meteorological intelligence. One autumn evening, cleaning out old files, I found the last piece of evidence, a printout of Julia's email to James, planning their final escape. 2 more years, she'd written. Then we disappear into altitude permanently. They'd gotten their wish in a way, disappearing not into altitude but into anonymity. James grounded and gone. Julia relocated and reinvented. Their 3-year flight crashed into ground-level reality, leaving wreckage both financial and emotional. I shredded the email, letting the past become confetti. The weather outside was typically Portland, cloudy with chance of rain. No need to check other cities, no storms to track in places I wasn't going. The forecast was finally accurate. Stable conditions at ground level, visibility unlimited, no deception on any horizon. The weather app stayed deleted. Portland's patterns were predictable enough. And I'd learned the hard way that when someone starts obsessively tracking weather in random cities, they're not planning vacations or checking conference conditions. They're managing a logistical operation that depends on atmospheric conditions and flight schedules, building a secret life at altitude while pretending to live at ground level. But ground level, I'd discovered, was where real life happened, where marriages were transparent, where destinations were actual, where weather was just weather. Less exciting than secret altitudes, perhaps, but infinitely more stable. And after years of tracking storms in cities I'd never visit, stability felt like the greatest adventure of all.